everybody. Welcome back to our final week of correcting the Christmas story. I hope that by now you've learned something new about kind of the traditional way that we retell the story of Jesus' birth versus what God's word actually says. And so today we're going to come to the end of the story and we're going to talk about the wise men. There are two main things that need corrected when it comes to kind of our traditional way of talking about the wise men. And the first one is about how many wise men showed up to visit Jesus. We've sang the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are," for years and years. But if we look in the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem." So Magi is the word that's also translated in other translations as wise men. It doesn't say that there were three of them. It only uses a plural term. And so we know there had to be two or more wise men, but we don't know exactly how many came to visit Jesus. I think that the three comes from the fact that there are three types of gifts brought. If we look at verse 11, where it says they presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. So I think that somewhere along the line, we took those three gifts and envisioned that one wise man brought each gift, and that's kind of how we ended up at the three kings or the three wise men. But we know from looking in God's word, we don't actually know how many wise men showed up to visit Jesus. The second thing that needs corrected in this part of the story is the fact that we often see the wise men portrayed coming to kind of that nativity scene, whether it be in a barn or a cave or wherever it was that Jesus was born. We see the wise men often show up there when we're setting up our nativity scene. But if we look again in Matthew chapter 2, if we look at verse number 11, it says, "On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him." So that verse is talking about those magi or those wise men. And it says on coming to the house. So we know from the context there that this is later on in that story. And if we look at verse 16, it says, "When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he learned from the Magi." And so by timing it out, we know from that verse that Jesus was somewhere in probably that toddler phase. Mary and Joseph and Jesus were living in a house, and he was somewhere from 2 years old or younger. And so those wise men don't actually show up to the same location that the shepherds come to worship a brand new infant Jesus. And so when I was growing up, the preacher at the church I attended at the time used to always say, when you set up your nativity scene, you should put the wise men in the kitchen because they are still journeying on the way to visit Jesus. So that's kind of been something I've been a stickler with my own family when we set up our nativity scene, making sure that those wise men aren't actually part of that barn or cave scene. But really, when we make these corrections in the Christmas story, it's not because we want to prove that we're right. It's not that we want to make other people feel bad because they're following the traditional retelling and they kind of have missed out on these things. It's really because we just want to make sure that as we're communicating, that we communicate the accuracy and the truth of God's word. So we're not doing this to make people feel bad about what they've heard before. It's so that as we retell the story to our children, to our neighbors, to our friends and family, we are able to accurately retell it according to the scriptures. We hope that you've learned some new things over the course of this month, and we wish you a very blessed Christmas as you celebrate the birth of Jesus.